Well, good evening and thank you for braving the weather. I'm Julie Robotham and I'm going to be your MC this evening. And first of all, I would like to invite Auntie Lola Ryan up to the stage.
Nungambi, everyone. In our Darrawal language, that means hello, welcome. I'm from the Darrawal language group, and our Darrawal nation goes from Sydney Harbour to the Shell Harbour region, and I belong to the Bidjigal and the Yuan people. The Yuan people are the South Coast people. One of my grandmothers was born in Bateman's Bay. If people know where that is, it's about 4 hours down the south coast. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Bidjigal and the Gadigal clans, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Sorry, this rain makes you run a little bit. And extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present here this evening, and I'd also like to extend that respect to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here to welcome you all to, it's the engineering, isn't it? Engineering the future. Wow. What you do is great, and thank you for having me. So our welcome to country is to ensure everyone feels welcome to the land, and to thank our ancestors for taking care of our land for tens of thousands of years, hence why we live in such a beautiful country and we have survived for over 60,000 years. Our community of La Perouse was originally an Aboriginal reserve. When the Aboriginal Protection Board came into fruition, they put all the Aboriginal people on reserves, and La Perouse ended up being one of those reserves. I was born on that reserve, and my dad was born on the beach just over the hill from that reserve. So with that, with being a reserve, we lost our language. So we have just started through intense research bringing our language back, and it is now being taught in preschools, daycares and primary schools, so that our children will grow up, and by the time they're, 10 or 15 years from now, they may be fluently speaking Darrawal. So sharing our culture with others enhances the fact that Australia has very strong Aboriginal history, and our stories will be told. We tell these stories through storytelling, music, song, dance and art, and our Dreamtime stories are held in the hearts of our elders who are part of this bringing back the language and bringing back the traditional culture to our people. So on behalf of the La Perouse Local Aboriginal Land Council, my ancestors, my community, I wish you all a very, very warm welcome and enjoy your evening, and I hope the rain stops by the time you leave, because it was pouring when I came. Thank you very much, and sorry, Budjiri Nandawavi. That means thank you and see you later. Bye.
And thank you, Auntie Lola, and it is indeed a great privilege to be here on Bidjigal and Gadigal land this evening. Now we would like to invite Lauren Kark to the stage. Lauren is an associate professor in the UNSW Graduate School of Biomedical Engineering, and she's going to give an address.
Apologies. Good evening, everyone. I would also like to thank Auntie Lola for her warm welcome and acknowledge the traditional custodians of this country, the Gadigal and Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. As we turn to our theme tonight, I want to particularly acknowledge First Nations peoples as the original health innovators in Australia. Their deep knowledge of the environment, plant and animal species, and their understanding of the interconnectedness of all things are at the heart of sophisticated First Nations healing practices and medicines that continue to be used today, and from which we have much to learn. My name is Lauren Kark, and I'm the Associate Head of the Graduate School of Biomedical Engineering. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this panel discussion on technology and longevity. This is a very timely topic, as the intersection of technology and healthcare has the potential to revolutionise the way we live, work, and age. I am proud to say that the Graduate School of Biomedical Engineering is at the forefront of research and education in the field of biomedical engineering. We have made significant contributions to the development of medical technologies that address the challenges of an ageing population, and our graduates are equipped with the skills and knowledge needed to tackle the evolving healthcare landscape. We are fortunate to have with us today a group of experts who bring a diverse set of perspectives to this important issue. We have a technologist who will shed light on the latest advancements in medical technology, a clinician who has vast experience in treating ageing populations, a health technologist who will reflect on the economics of innovation, and an ethicist who will examine the moral and social implications of increased longevity. The question of how to extend healthy lifespans is not a new one, but the speed at which technology is evolving, our population is aging, and chronic disease is increasing has brought us closer than ever before to finding meaningful solutions. We are witnessing the development of new tools that can identify, diagnose, and treat a wide range of diseases that are currently associated with aging. These technologies promise to enhance our understanding of the aging process and help us to address some of the key challenges of an aging population. However, as with any technological advancement, there are also ethical, social, and economic considerations that need to be taken into account. We need to consider the impact of increased longevity on healthcare systems, the workforce, and social structures. We need to ensure that we are not creating new inequities and that everyone has equal access to the benefits of these technologies. Our panelists will help us to navigate these complex issues and provide insights into how we can best prepare for the future. They will share their knowledge, expertise, and perspectives to help us better understand the implications of technology and longevity and how we can harness the power of these advancements to improve the quality of life for everyone. So, let us welcome our esteemed panelists and thank them for joining us today. I invite you to all engage in a lively discussion and share your thoughts, questions, and ideas on this fascinating and important topic. Thank you for being here today, and I look forward to a thought-provoking conversation.
Thank you, Lauren, and I'd now like to invite the panelists to the stage. Please come up. So first of all, to the audience, thank you for everybody who has submitted a question ahead of time. We have had some discussion about those questions, and we're really looking forward to answering them this evening. Also, you can submit questions live, and I think that the Slido is there on our final line here. Please do use your phones to go onto Slido. Submit a question yourself, or you can upvote somebody else's question, and I will be seeing those while we moderate the panel this afternoon, and many of those questions we hope to be able to answer for you. It's going to be a very interactive panel. We're going to keep the questions, the responses to the questions good and short so that we can move through a lot of different topics we're hoping tonight. So for now, I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, starting at the end.
Thank you, thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm Eugene Salole, and I run my own small consulting business in the black art of reimbursement, helping suppliers of medical devices to get their products paid for, either by government or by private health insurers.
I'm Leach, Scully. I'm Professor of Bioethics here at UNSW, and I'm also Director of the Disability Innovation Institute here. I've been working in bioethics for many years. My research has primarily looked at the very beginnings of life around reproductive technologies and genetics, and also more recently around the end of life, around issues of voluntary assisted dying and euthanasia.
Hi, I'm Beena Ahmed. I'm an associate professor in electrical engineering here at UNSW. I'm also the technical lead of the connected health stream of iHealth E. My research is primarily in signal processing, specifically biomedical signals such as ECG, EEG, and speech signals. I'm looking at trying to identify patterns in those signals to help us diagnose disorders such as insomnia, arrhythmia, dementia, other speech disorders.
Hi, Sze-Yuan. I'm a clinician, interventional cardiologist at Prince Wales Hospital. It's my day job. I also sometimes hang out with Nigel Lovell and various people at university. I have a conjoint appointment here. I'm the clinical lead for Connected Health for iHealthy. It involves projects around utilisation of EMR data, remote monitoring, and some AI applications using that data.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks, panelists. So to briefly set the scene, thinking about this question of longevity, the first Australian life table was presented in 1867 by Maurice Birbeck Pell, who was a professor of mathematics. And he calculated at that time that life expectancy for a newborn in the Australian colony was 45 years. And that was doing well. It was 5 years more than England and 13 years more than Belgium. And we've been speculating about why Belgium. If anyone's got an answer to that, pop it on the Slido. But in Australia now, a boy born in 2020 can expect to live to age 81 and a girl to 85. So we've essentially doubled lifespan over 150 years. And that depends who you are, of course. For First Nations Australians, there's still a longevity gap. That's about 8 years at the moment, and it is slowly narrowing. And the reasons behind that longevity increase have been primarily public health and hygiene. Then we've seen pharmaceuticals, and now increasingly we're seeing medical technologies really contribute to the extension of human lifespan. So that's the context in which we're having this conversation tonight. And based on the skill set of the people here, we're going to put those questions to the panel. And one of the questions which came in ahead of time was, what are the advantages and or complications of technologies that have been developed so far in terms of lengthening lifespan? And I'd just like to use that as a starting point and ask the panelists generally to address this question of technology and lifespan. How should we start to consider that question? Maybe we'll start with you, Beena.
Well, technology is already increasing our lifespans. We're already using technology to a great extent. We're using pacemakers, we're using hearing aids, surgeons are using technology in the operating theater. We've all had X-rays, MRI, CT scans, dentists, ophthalmologists. So technology has proven that it has increased the life expectancy that you were just discussing. And we're iterating, getting better at it, getting better at how to use technology for clinicians to do their jobs better, for us to rely on technology to live our lives better, to improve our quality of life. And I think it's an ongoing process and will continue.
Thank you, Beena. To you now, Eugene.
Oh, I think just to sort of say up front that advances in technology, both pharmaceuticals and medical devices, has undoubtedly improved life expectancy, quite apart from the points that was being made before about, the community public health measures like pure drinking water and so on. Quite apart from all of that, advances in technology have made a huge difference to life expectancy. So they've been a good thing by and large. There are issues, primarily in my view, about affordability, which I think we're going to come back to later. But on the whole, advances in technology have done wondrous things for life expectancy, I think. Well, I know.
Thank you. Sze-Yuan.
As an interventional cardiologist, I've benefited greatly from technological advancements. I use stents, implantable devices, pacemakers, defibrillators all the time, and Beena intimated, the sort of imaging type modalities have made enormous advancements in terms of our diagnostics and prognostication and treatment of patients. I I guess in terms of the limitations or the downsides of technology, not so much a downside, but obviously some technologies, there may be safety concerns, and so it's the importance of clinical trials and regulatory processes. They're very expensive, you know, there has to be some sort of cost recovery for companies that invest an enormous amount of money in developing, testing these technologies, and so balancing the expenses of one technology versus another. And of course, just because you can do it or use it doesn't necessarily mean that you should.
Jackie, would you like to come in on this one?
Well, ethics is largely about sort of broader scale of things and some very fundamental questions about, is this bad, is this good, right, wrong, and so on. But there are very rarely any black or white answers, unfortunately, in an ethical analysis. Sitting here, I'm reminded that, you know, sometimes in my job as an ethicist, I feel a bit like the person who goes around destroying parties, because you come into a situation in which people are very enthusiastic about a very good technology, and it is undoubtedly the dream, human dream for millennia to live longer, or even to live forever. It must particularly have been so for people whose lifespan is sort of 20 years rather than our lifespan. And I pop up saying, well, yeah, that's great, but hang on a minute. Think about some of the potentially wider consequences, the social consequences, global consequences, but also the intergenerational consequences when you start thinking of societies in which perhaps we expect to have not just children and grandchildren, but great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, great-great-great-grandchildren, and think about how much that might change social structures and family expectations.
Thank you, Jackie. And the next question that I'm going to share with the panel is also one that came to us ahead of time. What criteria will determine how long is long enough in terms of lifespan? And Jackie, I'm just going to pick up on you again and ask you to develop what you were just saying into thinking about how long is long enough.
Well, I mentioned they're living forever, which I guess is the kind of ultimate dream. One of the things about asking questions like, how long is long enough, how far can we go, where do we draw the line, and so on, is always to ask the question, well, from where? From whose perspective? From the person who has a life expectancy of maybe 40 years, something like an additional 5 years might have seemed fantastic. If you have a life expectancy of 85, maybe 90 years, it might not seem so great. We're also, I think, conditioned to think about small changes more benevolently than we are to think about big changes. So if I were to say to you, how about 5 years extra life? I think most of you would feel, yeah, okay, I'll go for that one. I'll take that pill. How about 50 years extra life? And that starts to bring in different kinds of considerations. And 500 years of extra life. And that's a very, very different kettle of fish. But every 50 years is just 5 and 5 and 5 and 5, you know? It's something that we reach incrementally rather than very suddenly. And you might find yourself in a situation in which lifespan has increased by 50 years, but you've never really thought about it like that because it has always been a 5-year increase and then another 5-year increase and then another.
Thank you, Jackie. Sze-Yuan, from a clinical point of view, you would see this a lot, how much value there is to people in the increments of additional life that people get. How would you approach that question of what is long enough?
I don't have that question very often, actually, and I was thinking about this when I was invited to this talk. Because I have to say, in my experience, there aren't many patients that come up to me and say, oh, I want to live forever, or I want to live till I'm 100. Most people say they want to live well, or they want to be pain-free, or they want to be able to see their grandchild graduate or get married. And it's, I think longevity is important to people, but not as important as quality of life. So I think when we're thinking about technology and the value of technology, it shouldn't just be about this quantity, but rather the quality of life, because who wants to live an extra 50 years and be miserable? I think most people would rather live an extra 5 years and have great quality of life.
Let's just quickly test that in the audience. If you could live to 130 and live relatively free of pain and disease and disability, who would want to live to 130? And who wouldn't? Okay, what do the panelists think? I think the 130-year-olds win just by a whisker there. Yeah, so. But very close. Interesting, but as Sze-Yuan says, it is a lot to do with that quality of life and with those expectations that we have about the way that we live. And Jackie, you alluded to that as well, in terms of intergenerational families, which would change the way we live. It would definitely change the quality of the way that we live in many ways. Just to move on, I think now, and look at the cost of technology development, because that's a question that came up ahead of time, and it's also, I see, a theme which is very much emerging through the Slido. A question which came up earlier was, Eugene, has there been any attempt to determine the cost and therefore the viability of future technologies? And then that's a one-word answer, really, but if you could expand out from that, because you're somebody who works with funders and you work with patient groups and you work with clinicians, so you see this challenge from multiple perspectives. Yes, first of all, yes or no, has there been an attempt to quantify how much that's going to cost us? And then please contextualize that for us.
Yeah, look, I think the short answer is no, as we discussed before. It could be done in a very, very broad and therefore wobbly way, looking at historical data. But the real issue, I think, is that there's a huge disconnect between advances in technology, which are steaming ahead, especially with the convergence of AI and in the devices sector particularly, convergence of AI and lots of other technologies which are all coming together to come up with more amazing devices, which will definitely improve longevity. The trouble is that somebody's got to pay for them. And I think we as a community here in Australia, certainly, but also I think globally, haven't really addressed that. We've not really thought too hard about the fact that it's going to change. We're going to have to change everything, the way we think about social security, the way we think about retirement, the way we think about allowing people to work for as long as they wish, as long as they can, and that sort of thing. So I think there's all sorts of issues which haven't really been considered by us as society, whereas on the side, technologists are just steaming ahead, producing and coming up with amazing ideas and amazing technologies, which will in fact help us to get to very, very old age. Now, you picked on 130 earlier on, and you asked the audience, and I noticed, it's hard to see from up here, but I noticed a few youngsters were quite happy to put their hand up at the 130. The good news is that demographers will tell you that there's a very good chance that this century, the record for longevity, which stands at 122, which was set in 1997, I think, there's a good chance that it's going to be broken this century. And there's a 90% chance, demographers will tell you, that folks, somebody somewhere, will live to well beyond the 126 come the next century. So keep your fingers crossed. You might get to the 130 yet.
Would any of the other panelists like to pick up on that question? Any further comments there?
Can I ask Eugene a question?
You may.
Eugene, your entire job is about value.
Yes.
But when you talk about value, you talk about money. Am I correct? And the government thinks about value as money. And I would argue, akin to my comment before about quality of life, that value isn't always measured in monetary terms. It's about benefit that patients derive, some of which, is subjective and can't be measured or isn't measured. So should we change our value system to include other measures like that when we decide what we fund, what we don't fund?
That's exactly right. And I think, this could become a very technical discussion, so I'll spare you all that. But in actual fact, just to set the record straight, it's not entirely about money. So we, Australia, have been pioneers in this idea of value-based medicine and using particular techniques to decide what's valuable in relation to what we pay for through the pharmaceutical benefit scheme, for example, or through other schemes that we have for devices. And even though the dollar value is really important, it's connected to life acquired or life saved. And there's a component in that which takes into account the quality of that life. The trouble is, as we were briefly discussing before, is that the denominator in all of this is usually survival, i.e. mortality, because you can't argue with death. You're either alive or you're not. The problem with taking into account these other more fuzzy things, endpoints like patient preference or subjective feelings of comfort or whatever you choose, they're just hard to measure. And that makes it very difficult, therefore, to make a scientific, shall we say, or a considered decision about what to pay for. I mean, ideally, we should, absolutely. But by and large, most of us in this room, I guess, wouldn't be sufficiently au fait with the ins and outs of a particular condition or clinical medicine or anything to be able to make a subjective decision about whether or not what we're being offered by our carer, our doctor, is valuable or otherwise, because it's all very internal, it's subjective, we don't really have a bigger picture. But the focus sit on the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee, for example, who make the decisions on our behalf about what the government will subsidize by way of medicines, have to be sort of Solomonic in their thinking, and mortality is the obvious way to go about it. Improvement in mortality or reductions in mortality. It's a hard one, and this is really, I guess, what I was alluding to before, that, to try and, longevity is fantastic, and there's a very good chance, as I said before, that we're all, not all, but a good number of us are going to make it to well beyond 110 in the next decades. Social policy, public policy, our general thinking hasn't really kept up with all of that kind of stuff. And so it's probably going to be high time that somebody starts to think about these sorts of things.
Thanks, Eugene. So picking up on that question of how we bring societal values into how we assess these things, another question that I'll go to you first on, Jackie, and it's very much echoed by what's coming through on the Slido. And then I'll have one for you, Beena, which picks up from where we're going with Jackie. But Jackie, how should extremely expensive advances be rationed? What's a good way of thinking about how we apply our funding to those most expensive breakthroughs?
There isn't a perfect way, and there are various ways of doing it. I think I would argue that we don't tend to take into account enough of how costs and benefits are distributed across the whole of society. We do tend to look to do those calculations, at least in a sort of doctor-patient relationship. It's always sort of one-to-one. Traditionally, what happens is that an innovation is very, very expensive and only the rich can afford it. Traditionally, also, what then happens is that cost comes down and more people start to be able to afford it. Whether that will happen with the kind of innovations that extend lifespans, probably, but we can't necessarily predict that. It's very unlikely, I think, that states will start picking up the costs for something which is perceived as purely about extending life. And the trouble with what we've been talking about today is that most of the things we're talking about are not actually just about extending life. That's the sort of science fiction-y side of it. It's about health, and it's about avoiding suffering, and it's about avoiding pain, it's about quality of life, etc. And on the way, it's stopping people dying, and it's pushing back the age at which they die. So it's really hard, in fact, to pull apart the quality of life thing and look at longevity in isolation and say, well, actually, is this worth it? If we were to try to do that, I think most governments would not put their necks out and say, yeah, we're going to publicly subsidize the capacity for people to live another 20 years. If you want that, guys, go and pay for it yourself. What that will mean, of course, is that the rich people will be able to go and pay for it themselves. And it will be that, as I think you mentioned earlier, that sense of those who have already receiving more. Yeah, I think I'll stop there for.
Thanks, Jackie. Picking up on that with you, Beena, and here's a challenge for you. There's a question coming from the floor. Please give us examples of how technology is used to address inequities in longevity. So Jackie has talked about how the biggest advances are going to go to the richer people first. Mm-hmm. Do you have any counter examples of where technology is being used to even out that distribution of longevity?
Yes, I think one very cost-effective way that has proven to help in healthcare is the smartphone. In third world countries, there are places where there's more smartphones than perhaps even toilets. And people have been administrating healthcare via the smartphone. So taking images of skin lesions to do diagnostics. They've used it in maternal healthcare as well too. They've used it to monitor elderly for falls, for dementia as well too. So I think we talked about the cost of proving that a treatment works or clinical trials and all of that. But I think technology can also help reduce that cost and make healthcare more equitable, because we will have devices that allow proliferation of healthcare or health technology to people who currently can't access it, and also will allow us to test new therapies, new treatments, perhaps within a controlled environment, using AI, using simulations. We're already doing that. I mean, we looked at the COVID vaccine, for example. There was a lot of AI that went into different iterations before it actually went to clinical trials. So yes, I think we are seeing examples now, and we'll see even better examples in the future.
And sometimes it requires us to expand our perspective of what's a medical technology, and that a smartphone can be a medical technology.
Yes.
Very interesting indeed.
Can I just pick up on that? That's fantastic. I mean, you're absolutely right. I think AI is going to make a huge difference, and in fact is probably the technology which is helping to even out equity, not just in terms of longevity, but just in health generally. The snag is, though, that I can't see anybody saying, well, we're going to buy everybody a smartphone. So that's part of the problem. You know, we have this technology which is wonderful, but at the moment, you buy it if you can afford it. And if you can't afford a smartphone, well, you don't get it. So that's an issue which I think needs to be addressed by all of us. I mean, it's not just a government thing. I mean, because at the end of the day, in our kind of health system, which is tax-based, it's our money, and we need to, have a say in whether or not we spend it towards like very, very expensive nuclear submarines or towards smartphones for everybody.
Can I answer that?
Yeah, go.
I agree with that point entirely. So, I mean, we're doing lots of work with remote monitoring using smartphone apps, which has the potential, just bring it locally, Beena, to service parts of rural, regional Australia that don't have the same access to healthcare that we do in metropolitan Sydney. But some people can't afford it. And not only that, but some people don't have Wi-Fi, they don't have cellular internet access. And so, it's not just about provision of the technology, it's also the infrastructure, which has to be government-led to enable this, so that the technology can be accessed by all. The technology has this wonderful ability to improve our reach, to deliver virtual services. We saw that in the pandemic, but that also there's the risk of creating this digital divide if we don't address these issues as we're going along and building the technology.
I should say I wasn't making a cheap dig at the submarines. I mean, just for your information, we've made a big hoo-ha about the $368 billion that we're going to be spending over the next 30 years. Folks seem to have forgotten that in financial year 2018, just in 2018, we as a community spent $242 billion gambling. So just to put it all in perspective.
And the perspective is really important, I think, in terms of the expenditure decisions that we make collectively and that we make as a society. Speaking of societal impacts, the sky fell in last year, didn't it? ChatGPT got launched, and suddenly we were all in a moral panic about students being able to cheat on their essays and now not be detected. And that was quite amusing for some of us for a little while, but those kind of technologies, the ability to interrogate a global collective of information, and for machines to learn from that information and for their responses to become better over time. Could the panel please talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning and how they see it being deployed in their various areas of expertise? And I think we'll go, you want to go to Beena
We should start
first.
with Beena, I think. That one,
Okay,
absolutely.
we'll start with Beena and then we'll come back to you, Sze-Yuan, so you're not getting
Sure.
away with it.
Well, I think obviously AI is here. It's not going anywhere. So we'll be seeing it more and more in healthcare, as other spheres of life. And I think it will change healthcare. Currently, healthcare is very reactive. We tend to go to a doctor or a hospital when something's wrong with us. And I think the fundamental change that AI will bring is will allow us to prevent us from getting sick. And that's the biggest change. I mean, we'll obviously have AI that help us get better faster, make doctors diagnose patients better and faster. But it's a mindset that will change, is that we will know how to prevent us from getting sick or getting sicker, and improving the quality of life that we lead as we get older. And that's a really fundamental shift in the way we approach healthcare, and that feeds into the point that we were talking about earlier about providing the infrastructure we need. Government needs to think about that, because currently when we think of healthcare, we tend to think of the cost of providing a treatment. I'm not sure exactly how a health economist worked on that, but now we have to think about the cost of keeping someone healthy so they don't get sick. And that cost is going to be substantially less than actually treating someone. And so we'll be seeing AI in hospital management, for example, workflow management, things like ChatGPT. There's also BioBart, for example, which clinicians can use to query medical information. And then it will automate a lot of processes that are manual, then diagnostic, preventive, and as I talked about earlier, simulating treatments, drug delivery, developing new drugs, pharmaceuticals, all of that is already being influenced by AI and will be.
Thank you, Beena. Sze-Yuan, how are you seeing the things that Beena just discussed being implemented or even being thought about being implemented in the cardiac area where you work?
So I agree with Beena. I think AI is absolutely here. It's not coming, it's here and here to stay, and is really exciting. And I guess to understand the benefits of it, you have to have worked in the healthcare system and understand what enormous stress the healthcare system is under. We've built a $1 billion facility which has less beds than 10% less beds than was projected to be required. Our beds are full, more than full. We run at 110% capacity in the cardiac ward across the road. And so there's always this onus to improve efficiency, to improve outcomes, to get people get them out, because the next lot are sitting in emergency trying to come up. So any iterative improvements in that system to take the load off clinicians, who are our most valuable asset, I would say that, and also to improve patient outcome, must be supported. And AI, for example, we collect an enormous amount of healthcare data from patients. They're now in electronic form, and we can utilize them to build AI-driven algorithms for risk prediction, so that we know who's the sickest, we know who needs our attention and those who are okay, so that we can best utilize the finite resources that we have. There's fear out there as well about, Terminator style, Sarah Connor, you're marked for death today, see you later, but there's a very important role that the clinician plays that AI or robots can never replace, right? And an end-of-life discussion is a really good example of that. That a patient may, go off the Richter scale in terms of their risk prediction that's based on AI, but to have an end-of-life discussion to explain to a patient what that means requires compassion, requires a cuddle sometimes, requires conflict resolution, requires a lot of human emotions that AI can't provide, right? So I don't think AI is ever going to replace humans. It's just going to enable us to do our job better and more efficiently.
Yeah, but it may triage what pathway a human might be on before they meet you in the end-of-life conversation, perhaps. So just picking up on a question that's come in from the floor just a moment ago. ChatGPT is known to have human bias in it, and we know that human bias presents problems in medical management. So how do you see AI being navigated to reduce that bias? And Jackie, you'd like to go to you on that one.
How to avoid the bias in
Well,
AI.
how to navigate and reduce the bias is the term of the question. We may not be able to eliminate the bias, but the idea that as humans, our biases are scrutinized, and they're scrutinized in a human resources personnel kind of oversight way, and yet when we code something up within AI, those biases may be more hidden and yet more strongly baked into the assumptions.
Well, we encode those biases in the data that we put in, because the data is usually biased in the first place. And then that gets kind of set in, the risk, I think, is that it gets set into the algorithm, which then churns out the answer, whatever kind of answer it is at the end. And the big risk there, I think, something like AI, which is different from past technologies, is that it may be so complex that nobody really understands what's happened inside that black box. And then you have the challenge of, say, a clinician or the patient looking at the thing that's come out thinking, is this right or not? And there's a human bias, I think, to trust the machine because we paid a lot of money for it to do it better than we do, right? And so therefore it must be better. The way to navigate that or minimize the risk, I guess, is to remain intensely skeptical about some of the claims and the hype that's being advanced. That yes, AI and automated decision-making and similar technologies will help, will support, will make things a bit better, a bit faster, but they won't bring about heaven on earth. They won't make a healthcare system in which everybody can access preventative measures to keep themselves well and so on. If only for the reason, it could be to do with bias, it could be to do with distortions of the data. It could also be to do with that issue that we've mentioned already, we'll come back to, that my suspicion is that we will end up with not a reduction in inequities, but inequities that are distributed differently from the way they have been in the past. Where I used to work in the United Kingdom, we began to have a very big issue, a fairly deprived area in the northeast of England, when people had to access benefits online, and a large proportion of the population had no access online. They had no sort of digital interaction at all. If healthcare or any other system moves online entirely, yes, many people will benefit from that technology, but many people won't, and they will become invisible because they're not digitally present and they don't appear in the systems. And their perhaps decline in health and their perhaps decrease in lifespan rather than increase might disappear from sight.
Thank you, Jackie.
Julie, can I be provocative and ask Sze-Yuan a question?
Yeah.
Just to get you back. You know, your point about getting to the point where you might say to the patient, you know, okay, your time's up, see you later. Do you reckon that could well be a reality towards the end of the century, where because of rationing, because we can't afford the technologies, etc., for everybody, there's going to come a time where oldies who are, you know, super octogenarians get to their use-by date, and doctors have to be cruel, morally corrupt, and say, sorry, see you later.
So to answer that, I might use an analogy from my personal life. So even though I'm very pro-technology at work, I'm very anti-technology, certain technologies at home. And so my 15-year-old son wanted Snapchat, which I'm immediately terrified of, thanks to Tim Payne and various anecdotes like that. And the advice that we got from the school was, it's just the same as parenting 20 years ago. The rules have not changed. Yeah? The answer isn't to ban the technology, pretend it doesn't exist, because they'll use it. What you do is what you always did. You educate, you discuss, you have some governance in place, and you monitor. And so my answer to your question is the same, that AI or technology is just a tool. I mean, the tools are getting more and more sophisticated, but how we use the tool is for us to decide, not for the technology to decide. And so you still need, AI is a tool to support our clinical decisions. It never makes the decision. The technology should have appropriate governance. Everyone needs to be educated. It needs to be integrated and implemented in a way that we would implement anything else in our healthcare system. So I don't think, I hope we ever get to that situation.
I think, Beena, you have a point.
Yeah, I was actually going to go back and follow up on Jackie's, on the question about the bias in AI. And I think that's a very valid point, because AI is actually, built by humans, so it's going to possess whatever biases we encode in it, as you rightly said, and it's going to have the bias of the data that it's developed from. And so ultimately, I think that is a very crucial point that we should start thinking about, the data. That is going to be a very valuable commodity, both from a resource perspective, from a cost perspective. The data that our healthcare system is going to be worth billions to any person who wants to train an AI algorithm with it. Who has ownership over that data? And we, as when we're giving our data to those healthcare systems, what do I want our data to be used for? And then we should have guidelines that prevent biases from existing. So for example, in clinical trials now, you have encoded what representative of the demographics of population that you have. We should have a similar setup for AI. If you're developing an algorithm that is going to be used to population, it should have data from all those representatives of that population. regardless of whether it is difficult to collect from them or not, you know? And I think that is where governments and have to start thinking about, if we are going to be incorporating AI in our healthcare systems, what kind of AI do we want? How biased, as the audience, somebody rightly said, and also what data is being given? Who owns that data?
And to go back to your point about smartphones, Beena, it's not very hard to collect data from people any longer, is it?
No, and that's the downside now, is that we are willingly giving tech companies our data. You know, anybody who's wearing an iWatch or a smartwatch of some sort is giving their health data to that tech company. Are you able to get that data back? You know, and what are they doing with that data? I mean, they are developing AI methods for heart monitoring already with that data. But again, it's going to be biased based on the population that owns a smartwatch.
Going to go to Sze-Yuan on that question, and then to you, Jackie. Sze-Yuan, how is that working in practice? You have data that's coming in from patients, and you need to deploy that data, I assume, because all clinicians do, in a learning algorithm to produce better outcomes for your future patients. In terms of your word, governance, how is that governance happening at a departmental level, but perhaps at an institutional level? And are you seeing signs of that starting to be an interest among government?
Yeah, so I would say it's a very hot topic right now in terms of certainly cardiovascular data. Governance, I mean, we talk about governance endlessly. So, I mean, we have a project within our LHD, and the governance structures are pretty easy to define within an LHD, but when you start, because the hospital data is, the data custodian is the LHD, but when you start adding LHDs, as we are now, to our data repository, it gets murkier. And who owns the data? Or if we develop an AI algorithm that gets implemented later, where does the IP sit? Because it's the LHD's data, the data repository is governed by us. There might be a separate team coming in and running projects on that data. It's you know, so we're in the process of trying to understand and define those governance processes.
Okay.
It's tricky.
Thanks, Sze-Yuan. And that's a really good, I guess, summary from the front line of how a clinician is experiencing this in practice. I'm going to say now that we've got about 5 minutes before we need to wrap up the session, and I don't know about the panelists and the audience, but for me, the hour seems to have galloped along with lots more to talk about. But if I could just go to you, Jackie, on that question around the governance of data.
To ask me what?
To pick up on what Sze-Yuan has just been describing about how data can, who owns the data, and how we should think about the data that we are banking through apps and through other systems.
We just have not been very good as a society in thinking about data as a commodity, which is the way that's increasingly thought about nowadays. And in some of the research that I have been doing around automation in society and in healthcare, we talk about issues of data and ask people, are they concerned about handing over data to hospitals and to medical systems? And a surprising number of them are just fatalistic about it and more or less say, well, we signed away all that already when we got our loyalty card at the supermarket, we did that. I think that there's a lot of education to be done and trying to get people to see that there are controls. If you could imagine the world differently, which is something about what in engineering the future, you know, is about. It's I like the way that Auntie started this session, talking about stories, because there is something about imagining the story of the future when we make decisions in the present about how we want the future to be. And if we're doing that, then what we have to do have to have is a fairly good idea of how we want the future to be, and to be pretty sure about what a good future looks like for us, and try to do what we can to get heading in that direction. There are way too many things, I think, which have come upon us so fast that we haven't really had an opportunity to wrap them into our present story, let alone extrapolate into the future and see how we want them to be for us in a future society.
Thank you, Jackie. We're coming really close to the end of our session now, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists in reverse order in this direction to give us just a 1-minute statement, summary of the things that we've been talking about today, an idea that you would like the audience to take with them tonight, or indeed something that we haven't got around to mentioning yet, because there's absolutely heaps of that. And thank you very much to all of the participants who gave us questions. We've got dozens of them here and no chance to get to all of them. So please, Eugene, what would you like to say as a parting comment?
I think the future is bright from a technological point of view, from a longevity point of view. The focus that I think several of us have mentioned is that the focus should be on health span rather than lifespan. And for me, the burning public policy issue, which we're playing, I'm not even sure that we're playing catch up on actually, I think it's not really sunk in yet, is how we're going to afford all this fantastic stuff that's coming so that most of us can get access to it. So affordability, I guess, is the issue. And I hope a forum like this stimulates a few people to go away and think about it and write letters to the papers.
Thanks, Eugene. Jackie?
I hang around with philosophers a lot, and in philosophy they tend to talk about a good life and a flourishing life rather than a long life, or even about quality of life, or about trying to define what quality of life is. So I think my parting thought would be, if our goal is to have the most number of people in the world to have the best life possible, the closest to a good life and a flourishing life, how do we use the technologies we've got to get there? Rather than starting from the technology and saying, I've got this thing, what shall I do with it? Look at the goal and see whether the tools that you have are actually the right ones to achieve that goal.
Thanks, Jackie. Beena?
Yeah, picking up on that, and what I think I said earlier was that I think technology has the power to prevent us from getting sick. And I think there's no doubt we're living longer. And so that's what all of us should be doing, is using it to help improve our quality of lives, and also to get power over our health. Because currently I think healthcare is delivered rather broadly. Now we want patient-centric care. We want the technology to make us healthy as opposed to healthy as a community, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Thanks, Beena. Sze-Yuan?
I'm guessing most of the people in the room are engineers or technologists, and so my word of advice is to speak to patients and speak to end users and understand what it is that they want or what is missing, where the gaps are, and that's where the technology should start addressing those needs.
Well, thank you all, and thanks to all of the panelists for the thoughtful reflections that we've had this evening on this topic of technology and longevity, and where what's possible and what's desirable become intertwined, and that's where we've had some of the most fruitful conversations tonight, I think. And thanks to the audience for the challenging questions that you have presented us with, both before the meeting and during the meeting. The lateral thinking, the worldly knowledge that people have brought into the room tonight, I think have made for a fascinating discussion. And I know that the panelists and our colleagues from the School of Biomedical Engineering are very eager to continue the conversation. So please make your way towards the back of the room and join us for our networking reception.